I basically talked to Sir John Hegarty of BBH, okay, the big agency who created Levi's and amazing advertising for Levi's and Johnny Walker and Audi. And the reason was because he's actually invests a lot in startups. He has embraced AI. So I wasn't necessarily going to somebody who was in the good old days. We used to work with pencils and stuff like that. This guy actually uses all these tools, right? So to a great extent, I had a conversation with him, and here is what he said, which was mind blowing. And once you hear this, you'll see why it's different. So he said, okay, he says, Rishad, first he talked about startups and all of that, which I wanted people in the audience to realize this guy's, he's young in heart. He may be older, right? But here's what so he knows what's going on. Okay, that's number one. I asked about AI. He said it's the most amazing thing in the world. He said, I'm using it a lot. And he says, think about it as a collaborator, not even a tool. But he says the big issue, obviously, is IP rights and copyrights. He says that I don't know. I said that's a big. It's worrying me a lot. He says that's my whole area. But he said it's big, it's huge, all that stuff. That's great. So then I basically said, okay, let's talk about creativity in the age of AI. You seem to be like this creative guy. So let me ask you a question. And he says, I normally answer this question only inside my courses, but I'm going to answer it for free for you. And I basically asked him this. What is creativity? Okay. And this is his answer, right? Because everyone's talking about creativity and AI. So why don't I ask one of the legendaries of creative, what the hell is creativity? So this is the way he answers. He says, Rishad, often people have told me that the greatest art form of all is music. Okay. Because it's global, it moves people, you can listen to it, it works across languages, it beats with blood or whatever it is. It's music. And he says, it is a big art form, but he says, I believe the biggest art form of all is human life. That's how he starts. Okay, I believe the biggest art is human life. And he says, therefore, I believe that creativity is an expression of self. Mm-hmm. Okay? He says, all of us are creative. He said it's an expression of self. And he says, if you look at creative people, they will often say, I am trying to make, I am trying to say, I am trying to build, they always say, here's what I'm trying to do, right? Right. So when Jeff started the Buzz Machine, this is what he was trying to do. Maybe he was trying to incite somebody, but whatever it was, here's what I'm trying, here's what I'm building, here's what I'm creating, here's what I'm making. And he says, all of us humans are that. Right. But he says one of the changes that's going to happen is now all of us are going to be creative directors. We don't need art directors and copywriters because this whole thing is like creative. So it's different, but he says that's the key thing. But he says there are two forms of creativity, Rishad. And not only this is the definition of creativity, which is an expression of self, but there are two forms. He says there's pure creativity and applied creativity. And he says pure creativity is when somebody basically comes up with the first episode of The Simpsons. Right? Or comes up as Frank Gehry did with the Bilbao Museum, right? The Guggenheim in Bilbao. He says that's pure creativity. Applied creativity is the next versions of Simpsons. The
iteration.
Staircase, right? The staircase, right? Mm-hmm. And he says human beings are the ones who are going to do pure creativity. Mm-hmm. But they're going to offer, right? And he says, that's where the future of this is. And he says, that's eventually how brands get built and a whole bunch of stuff. And then he had an entire also big thing, which is very interesting, which is my counter to Mark Zuckerberg, right? Obviously. And my counter to Mark Zuckerberg is this. Because we had this conversation because we're like really, I mean, he's more seasoned than I am, but I'm not exactly young. And I basically said, can we talk about any brand that is not a personal brand that has been built online? That was the conversation we had, right? Personal brands, Kardashians, whatever, I understand. But has any brand been built online and has actually sustained? And we couldn't come up with any that sustained. There was Dollar Shave Club, it exploded. These direct brands come. And he basically says there is performance and there is persuasion, right? And he says, the biggest mistake, he says, all my startups I invest in, they come to me and they basically say, we're going to do performance stuff online. All data, all measurement. And he says, the idea that you had for the company and the risk you took on the company had no data. right? And now everything you're doing is data driven. And he basically says, I think actually data has become dangerous in the world of marketing. So that was and when I had that conversation,
because it's stifling to the actual human creativity
it
aspect,
is the human,
because you're too driven by the data.
Yeah, and what happens is you eventually just optimize, and his whole stuff is you keep optimizing. He says, and he wrote a piece before it became popular. He wrote this amazing piece how Nike was destroying itself, right? Because Nike basically decided to follow that model. They stopped doing, some of their big advertising. They did direct to consumer sales. They focused on their website and they focused on metrics. And as a result, they lost being involved with the culture. They stopped caring about the runner, which said women and men versus the runner versus the whatever it is. They let people like On and Hoka show up in the stores, right? On and Hoka did not launch online. They showed up in the stores, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things I believe the future of marketing is going to be is experience stacks. Right? And agencies will have clients with experience stack. So what's an experience stack? An experience stack has a digital element to it, which is online. It has a virtual element to it, like all these VR, AR things, right? Mm-hmm. It has an immersive element to it. And that immersive element could basically be everything from, digital twins to gaming and, all of that kind of stuff. And then it has a physical element of it, which could be outside, but it could also merge some of these, like the Sphere, in Las Vegas, right? And brands will be built with a combination of all of these. And as a result, the machine bot part of Meta's empire, which will be very powerful, will be a component of the building blocks of all of this.